In this video, I conduct a mock interview with one of my Greensboro College analytics minor students. So over the last year, my students in my analytics minor cohort have worked on an AI/analytics project. So essentially, they have delved into a podcast called How to Get an Analytics Job in the back end of YouTube. And they've leveraged AI tools such as Riverside to analyze that data, clip it up into short form content that can drive awareness. And in this video, I'm going to recreate an interview setting and coach my student on how to make sure that he talks about AI in an effective way. Speaking on the detail, the next question I got for you is, what experience do you have within analytics?
So I have two, which are internships that I've taken. One was with my college through their football team, where I was a sports analyst managing their practice and game era data. The second was through a capstone class where I managed podcast retention curves in AI data. Which one would you like to hear about first?
Tell me about the podcast.
So within the podcast, we were managing a podcast called How to Get an Analytics Job. And within that podcast, our professor would show us the retention curve and basically the analytics behind the podcast. We would mainly look at the retention curve and the audience groove. And we would look at that and we would determine what parts of the podcast are the audience looking at the most. Which parts are they going down on? Which parts are they staying constant with? And what we surmised was that we would post clips on the parts that the audience looked at the most. So we would pull however long the professor wanted to be, a minute, 30 seconds to a minute, and we will pull it. We will let AI clip the whole podcast, and we will pull we decided on 2 to 3 clips. 2 to 3 good quality clips that we felt were very informative and would garner retention. Mm-hmm. That's what we did.
Okay, that's intriguing to me because our company we know about AI, but it's still this kind of vague thing. Can you be a little bit more explicit about what AI tool did you use and what was the use case for that?
So we used Riverside.
Riverside.
Yeah. We used Riverside. We used Riverside, and basically what we did was we would post the whole podcast, and we would put keywords. We would have the AI look for keywords throughout the podcast, and the AI would clip those keywords. If they felt like one of the keywords matched up, they would clip it. Now, the only downside to that is sometimes the keywords and the video itself would not align, as in the topic at hand would not match what the title of the video is. So then we would have to go back in manually and then edit it and make sure that this is actually a topic that somebody would care about, or we would just delete it overall just because it wasn't relevant to what we were looking for at the time. So with AI, it was great for mass producing clips and helping us cut down on the manual labor, but we still had to find that fine line between the quality over quantity aspect.
Gotcha. Sorry, I'm just taking notes to kind of like come back. Okay, so did you see how that conversation went? So I asked you about, and I'm out of character, by the way. So this is no longer interview John David. Did you see how that conversation went, though? I asked you about the project, and then you mentioned AI, and then I made a note. AI is important to us. We know that we need to adapt to it, but we are not there yet. So that gives you an opportunity to kind of go in and just elaborate more. But you don't want to throw all of the detail out at all the time. So did that kind of give you kind of a representation of how those conversations can flow more smoothly?
Yes. So kind of even with that, with my answer to your question, kind of cut back on how much I'm giving into the project. So.
Right. And maybe this is like way over analyzing this, but it seems like you might feel not very confident, and the way that you're overcompensating with that for that lack of confidence is by oversharing details. I hope that's not like too harsh a criticism.
No, That's
So you're like trying to show. Here's all the things that I've done, and then it's so much detail that you kind of lose the forest for the trees, and then it's like, okay, he mentioned 16 different things. I don't know where to go from here, because it's just kind of overwhelming from a conversational. Because at the end of the day, I mean, an interview is a conversation, and you want to make sure that on like a personal level, you're connecting with the other person. You don't want to come off as like a robot that's just like regurgitating. You're not an AI. You're not just going to go in and just like, oh, thank you for the question, blah, 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 like, and just kind of spewing facts and details out. Like, but to give you some like concrete advice on how you responded to that question about like, tell me about your experience, and then talking about the podcast, have we talked much about the strategic versus tactical level?
We touched on it a little bit.
Okay. Explain it to me.
Tactical is more like you actually drilling, you actually going to tactical. Strategic is like you planning it out, setting up the goals.
So my feedback on how you answered that was that you completely missed the strategic and jumped straight into the tactical. So like, if I were to answer that question of, hey, I see that you did the student practicum. You worked on a podcast. Tell me about that. The first sentence would be something along the lines, well, on a strategic level, we wanted to grow the scope of the podcast. So the way that we did this was we came up with a way to create an awareness campaign to expand our reach. And what's really cool about that is we leveraged AI to go in and clip up the podcast to the most interesting bits about it, to scale out our overall reach. And then, that's kind of it right there. Like, then that there are going to be questions like, really, how did you identify what were the most interesting tidbits? You could say, that's a great question. Well, we went into the back end of YouTube, and if you look under the engagement tab, there's a chart that gives you a view of the retention, and then you can explain the retention curve. And you can say, well, what we did with the last week's episode is there were 3 peaks where people were most interested. We were then able to take those topics. We went back and listened to what we were talking about during those peaks, fed it through that AI, and then all of a sudden we were able to generate 10 clips to retarget the ideal audience for this podcast. So this is a little bit hard to explain. And it's hard because we're on a podcast too. Like, it adds like a whole nother layer of like almost performance. But is that making sense?
No,
like,
it makes sense.
Do you want to try? Do you want to try it one more time?
Yeah, we could try it.
All right, we'll try it one more time, and then we'll close out the podcast. So you're almost through. All right, Dewan, I see that you got the student practicum where you worked with a podcast, and there's like analytics behind it. Can you tell me about that?
So within that podcast, our goal was, we asked the teacher what his goal for his podcast was, and he said was to basically grow his podcast and reach a target audience. So what we did was, the plan that we came up with was to basically take the most interesting parts of the podcast, clip those, and then run them through AI. Now, how we did that was...
See, I think you don't even have to go into the detail. So like, it's almost like you can just kind of start high level. Like, what's the overall strategy? What is almost like the why? And then, is that feel uncomfortable? Just like saying 3 sentences of an answer?
I think so. I think
interesting. Why do you think that is?
Maybe it's probably me assuming that I feel like they're already going to ask the question instead of just letting them.
That's quite an assumption, though, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think that just me not just letting it just happen naturally. I think that's what it is. I think it's just me trying to lead it into my strengths instead of just letting them ask me about my strengths.
Well, it's funny because like I remember a month ago I asked you like, do you want to do like a mock interview? And you're like, no, I got this. But now you're in like the hot seat. It's like a little bit more stressful than you probably anticipated, right?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, this is perfect timing because you got, when's your first interview coming up?
It is